Angela McArdle is here. She is the chair of the National Libertarian Party, and we're going to be talking about a lot of interesting things, but we're going to start with one of the trending news stories of the week. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. announces he's running for president, and you can't really get very far, Angela, in these articles without seeing that, quote, Kennedy has long been the face of the anti-vaccine movement that draws support from the right. Now, there's a couple, I think, well, at least one, first off, one misinformation piece here that I don't know what to call it. Factually incorrect. I think like they often, when talking about RFK, he's like this right-wing extremist Democrat guy for the news. And honestly, there are a lot of people that follow me that are, I think, on the left and the right who like him. I have people in my audience who think he's a Trojan horse. I have people in my audience that don't like him at all. I mean, I have a wide variety, but I think it's interesting how he's often typified by the press as a right winger, but he's running as a Democrat. So I don't know. Can you explain? I guess we're going to start here. Like, just give me your initial thoughts when you first saw that he was running for president.
Okay, I think there's a lot to unpack here. So he sort of sums up some of the political, what would I call it? Like some of the interesting new developments in political discourse lately, which is there's things that have been classically associated with the left are now being associated with the right. So medical freedom, being interested in health, some of that stuff is viewed as like hippie crunchy granola stuff. You know, now it's being viewed as conspiracy stuff, which I think is kind of interesting. He's literally running as a Democrat, and they're still calling him someone who's far right. So that's like a new interesting thing that's cropped up in political discourse since, I don't know, like maybe 2016, that your label literally doesn't matter. It's whatever corporate media, and our Orwellian like talking heads call you. That's what you are. Like your label literally doesn't matter. Same as like you could be a black person and be a Nazi if you voted for Donald Trump or you don't agree with certain political issues. So I think that's really interesting. It's almost like, we're seeing, what would I call it? Like a mimetic manifestation run as a political candidate. And I think that's one of the most interesting things about his race.
They do talk here about central figure in anti-vaccination movement, also promoted other conspiracy theories, baseless idea that 5G telecom networks are being used to control people's behavior. And then okay, oh wow.
Did he though? Did he? Because I follow him and I've heard concerns about, like health issues, that it could cause, headaches and issues, but I haven't heard him say that it's actually being used as a control mechanism. But that doesn't mean he didn't say it. I just haven't heard it.
I'll agree with you. I have not heard that either. I have heard about concerns over 5G, and frankly, that's not a conspiracy theory. I mean, I'll just go. I've had scientists on here. Well, what's really funny, actually, Angela, just kind of background. I had this 5G expert, Dr. Deborah Davis, very aligned with the Democrat Party, like Clinton type Democrat Party person. And I think she's probably gotten a lot of flack for talking about 5G because it's like one of those, tinfoil hat topics. So the morning I was supposed to interview her, she was coming on my podcast. And I was thinking like, I'm taking the risk, on my reputation because people are going to say, wow, she talks to people who are concerned about the vaccines and the vaccine mandates. Now she's talking to a 5G person, like Allison has really gone off the cliff. So here I am like, okay, but I'm going to do it because I'm interested in the topic and, whatever, I'll talk to anybody. And her PR person calls me that morning and she's like, Allison, are you an anti-vaxxer? Are you an anti-vaxxer? I'm like, why are you asking me that? She's like, well, because we have concerns about coming on your podcast. And I'm like, yeah. So they canceled on me. Like
the 5G lady canceled on you.
The 5G lady canceled. Well, I mean, she may not know her PR people did that, but they wanted to protect her from the anti-vax, movement or whatever they label it as, the anti-vax conspiracy theorists, however they saw it. And so, yes, she never came on my podcast because of that. So I just give that as a background because I think it's interesting. You know, it does bring into perspective, like, as a Democrat, if you're running as a Democrat or you're aligned with the Democrat Party, you want to be able to still go to the cocktail parties or get funding from, these big Democrats, where you're willing to take your ideological risks and where you're like, no, that's a bridge too far for me. And so I just thought that was really interesting. And so when you think about RFK, it's like, why, like somebody in the chat was saying, I wish you would run as a third party candidate. Why run as a Democrat?
So let's dig some of this stuff out a little bit more. I mean, I think with respect to like the 5G stuff and the vaccination stuff, it's really unfortunate because you could say, hey, I have health concerns. I'm curious if 5G causes headaches in children or it irritability or just, like, is there something there to that? That is a really just like a baseline, fairly innocuous concern. You're like, I'm not necessarily opposed to it. Maybe I just don't want to live right next to some sort of tower. I'm worried about a satellite, whatever. You could say it. You could be coming from a place of ignorance, but not sound crazy. And same with vaccinations. You could be like, I got them in the 80s. I didn't get very many. Now I'm concerned about the number and them all being lumped together with kids. Maybe this isn't a good way. When you go to, they have the nanobots in them and then the 5G activates it and you become, like a CIA bot, then we're like, maybe let's slow down a little bit. And I think that that's what probably the PR people for your ex, almost guest might have been concerned about. I know that's what a lot of people are freaked out about. They're like, I don't want to sound like the nanobot people. I don't want to sound like the alien people. It's unfortunate.
I don't think that's what they were. They were concerned that I had people on who were, and I'm a little concerned to talk about this specifically right now. We're live on YouTube because YouTube still has all the policies about it. So we could probably go into depth if I cut the stream a little bit. But like, just generally speaking, I think they were concerned that the people like scientists and doctors that got on were questioning seriously the medical consequences and the mandates themselves. And people would walk away going, oh, maybe, and not because I have never had a single person on who has talked about nanobots. I've never had a single person on. I've had doctors talk about myocarditis and other stuff that I'm just not going to go in, but documented health effects,
How do you get red pilled in such a siloed way? That's kind of fascinating.
What do you mean?
Only 5G. Like, you're only really laser focused on 5G and you're not questioning any of the other things that are happening around us right now.
Yeah. Well, you know what? She may be. I mean, the reality is, like, that's always a question I have, like, what you are willing to talk about in your private life over your cocktail at night is very different than what you're willing to talk about with Allison Morrow on her podcast. And it just may be one of those things where you're just like protecting your turf. And you're like, well, I'm willing to discuss this, but I've already gotten enough flack on this. So I don't want to get even more because I'm going to look, because who knows? I mean, and what these people are like, her specifically, what she personally thinks. Yeah. It's just like what you're willing to be publicly associated with.
And I think you touched on something with RFK Jr. there, like, I think that there's a lot of things where he's just straight up like, let's go there. He didn't necessarily even talk very much about vaccination in his speech, which was like very long. It was like over an hour and a half. He talked a lot about health concerns and things that alluded to certain consequences of vaccination, but he didn't say that there were, he didn't start listing side effects and things like that. And I bet that there are probably, some reasons that he decided to run for the Democratic nomination. One being, like, it's like a legacy thing for his family. I think there's a little bit of naivety about him being able to fix things over there, an interest in like a return to civil political discourse, which a lot of people say is very much needed right now. And he could maybe move the needle in that direction, but they're definitely not like his home base. Like, that's not his supporters. It's going to be independents, libertarians, Republicans who are not diehard for Trump or DeSantis. It's not going to be DNC people.
What do you think about the people who look at him like some saw Trump, which is still affiliated with some of the very powerful special interests, I guess, that got us in some of these situations, or at least the
Yep.
political party and political players that have gotten us to where we are, and that he seems really good, but he would be like a Trojan horse. What do you think about that?
I think there's some merit to concerns over things that he said about the CIA. So I just re-listened to his talk earlier this morning, and one of the things that he said was that there were 22,000 people who worked at the CIA, and most of them were really good people. And it just happens to be that like the bad apples, rise to the top, and those are the ones who are in charge. And I mean, from a libertarian perspective, I think the entire agency needs to be abolished. If I were to take a really moderate position, I would say strip it down and get rid of 90% of it. It's hard for me to think about how this, like, on the one hand, he says, regime change is bad. Beware the military industrial complex. We need to close, revolving doors between the FDA and pharmaceutical companies, all of that. And then for him to say, but the CIA is mostly good. I can understand how people are confused and concerned, because that was not, that didn't get me excited. I was like, great, great, great. Whoa, what?
Do you think it's interesting, going back to this article, do you think it's interesting when it comes to picking apart candidates on like the dissident left or right or wherever, that the sort of mainstream press, or whatever you want to call it, picks things that seem like in some ways are hotly debated, but may actually not be where the real debate, I guess, like the stuff you just brought up, is worthy of concern. And it's like, it just keeps people arguing about some stuff that's actually kind of dumb. Does that make sense? My question.
Yeah. I mean, like in the NPR article that we're looking at right now, long been the face of the anti-vaccine, like I assume it says movement down there. We're at a point in like popular discourse right now where it's almost not hotly debated anymore. Everyone's made up their mind. So this is not like a wow, gotcha. I think anybody who knows anything about him is already aware of his position on vaccination. That's, NPR is really behind the curve anyway. What are they? They're, as Twitter now calls them, government funded media. The real issues, right, are his positions on climate change and the CIA. I think those are the things that are kind of freaking people out who would otherwise be really on board with him running.
Because why do you think NPR wouldn't like lead with that too? That Kennedy is an environmental attorney who, has long been for suing corporations over whatever, or the face of climate activism. I don't know. I'm just curious.
I mean, the NPR, I think I'm thinking of PBS. Like, if they had a mascot, it would be the NPC meme. Like, they can't even be like two-dimensional. They're like a one-dimensional character. They're always going to go with anti-vax, as their inflammatory thing. Like those, I'm not sure. Maybe they don't get paid enough over there to dig in and do some serious research. Maybe that's what it is.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm just like looking through the article. They do mention that he's an environmental attorney, but they don't really say anything about that. It's all about COVID, vaccines, sources of support being Donald Trump's former advisors and election denier Steve Bannon. Publicly suggested Kennedy should enter the Republican Party. Conspiracy theorist and Trump ally Roger Stone. So they don't say anything about the environmental stuff at all.
They're not smart. I mean, if they wanted to wreck the populist wave that's going to come behind his campaign, they would go after the climate stuff. I think it was years ago, but he said something to the effect that people who commit, like climate change crimes, whatever that meant, need to be locked up in prison.
He said that?
Yeah. Now, I would hope that his position has softened, because he certainly didn't lead with that in his talk. So I would hope that position has changed. The CIA stuff, that's the Trojan horse stuff, I think, that freaks me out, because he seems very opposed to like World Economic Forum stuff, Great Reset, all that. And I think it's difficult. I can't really wrap my head around how you would oppose that stuff. And then on the other hand, be like, also, I'm in favor of global like climate change policies, because that's the same thing.
Okay, I want to ask you about the Libertarian Party in a second because, well, I don't know. The depending on who you talk to, the Libertarian Party is gaining momentum because of populism and because of just disgust, I think, with the Uniparty is what I often hear it called. But then I read articles that's like it's combusting from within because it's become too extreme, or I don't know. And that usually comes from like the same outlets like we just saw with NPR. Okay. But first, Angela, I do have extremist altitude wine. That's what I call it because it comes from very high altitude. So I used to say it was extreme altitude, and that's what the wine club calls it. But I hope they don't mind that now I call it extremist altitude wine, because I always say, like, if we want to dibble dabble your toes in extremist behavior, because if you haven't been labeled an extremist, I don't really know like what you're doing anymore. I mean, it's so everybody is being called an extremist, so you might as well just get some extremist altitude wine and just own it. All right, you get these 3 amazing bottles. AllisonWinePromo.com, 50% off the wine itself, 50% off shipping. The one in the middle is from Argentina's oldest vineyard, over 200 years old. And the one on the left, they hand harvest all the grapes. One on the right is natural fermentation. They're all very unique. Can't get them at the grocery store. Why would you want to? You can support my work and have a great glass of wine. Also, Mother's Day is coming up. Great opportunity to get mom something to, remember you at the end of the day and why she feels like she has to drink all the time now. Okay. So go to AllisonWinePromo.com and support my work. Keep people like Angela coming on. You can also go to TwinEngineCoffee.com/Allison, which is another one of my favorite companies. Drink the espresso every morning with my raw milk lattes. I like also there's a dark roast here that's also very good. That's Elefante Black Edition. So check them out. There's a tea. If you are a tea drinker, the Katura tea is tea that's made from the coffee fruit. All of this is USDA certified organic. It's also high altitude, extremist altitude coffee. And it's another great way to support my work. So both companies, very pro free speech and have been with me for the long haul last couple of years. And I really appreciate everybody who has gone to support them. It's one of the best ways to support my work. Another great way, though, is to go to AllisonMorrow.locals.com, where you can be on my editorial board and put in your questions ahead of time for interviews. And there are a bunch for Angela, so we're going to get those in a second. Again, $5 a month to go one-on-one with most censored people on the internet, and a great way to support my work as well. You get exclusive content, and you get to be on my editorial board live streams every week. And again, it's just a fun community. Get to put your questions ahead of time for interviews, and I do try to get to all of them. So let's go real fast to the Libertarian Party right now. Okay, so like I said, I hear from people who seem to be very interested in bucking the system. A lot of voters who may not have been interested in being a libertarian now are kind of like, okay, maybe we just do need to have like a total, complete overhaul of the uniparty system, and libertarianism is looking a little bit more attractive to me. Than other people are like, nah, I don't know. Because what's their stance on abortion, for instance? I'm really interested in that, or other stuff that would concern them about just like, I don't know. Is the Libertarian Party maybe almost getting too big for its britches now? It's just going to become another special interest type political party. What do you think pros and cons of where the Libertarian Party is right now? Give me top 3 of each.
Okay, pros. We're not Republicans or Democrats. Now, that sounds really shallow, but political discourse is so ugly right now, and people are so exhausted by it. It's like, you can come take a breather with us. Pros, we are very much in favor of personal and economic freedom. We are against all of the crap that people have been subjected to over the last 3 years with lockdowns and mandates. We are very much against World Economic Forum policies, ESG, all of that. We're your ride or die best friend on that. Pros, we are much more accessible and transparent with how we run operations. And I think that that's really great. And so you can feel a deeper level of trust with us. So cons. We
And
are.
Angela, before we get into cons, could you address this in the cons? Here's the Hill article I was looking for. The Libertarian Party is collapsing. Here's why.
Which
and
one?
It's essentially saying that it's torn apart by an insurgency of alt-right sympathizers with racist tendencies.
Oh yeah, that's me. That's me. So what that means is we kicked out the people who were just like hardcore progressives. And this is the insult and slur that everybody gets thrown at. I also get called a misogynist. I'm a woman. I literally gave birth. Yeah, that I hate women.
Women.
Yeah, misogynist, not a misandrist, a misogynist. Yeah, I get called everything. It doesn't matter that we have gay members. It doesn't matter that we have a bunch of women in positions on our governing board. It's just the typical. You're a Nazi. You're racist. You know, that's how we know we're over target.
Okay. All right. So thank you for addressing that. Continue with your cons.
Cons. Okay, so we've been in startup mode for really 50 years. And one of the reasons that we took over, which is why, by the way, everyone is so angry, we're bad because we took over. Some people would call it a hostile takeover. I was in the party for several years before I became, the chair of the National Party. I was in the party before the Mises Caucus existed. That's the notorious, infamous Mises Caucus. We're the ones that wrenched control away from the people who had started to have the party go hard to the left culturally and also in policy too, which is really unfortunate. But it is kind of stressful to be in an organization that's in startup mode. We came in and we Elon Musked the organization. We had to fire a whole bunch of people. Revenue dropped for a little while because we had to fix, internal things, like everything that's boring stuff that's boring that would not make the headlines, our CRM, our customer relations management tools, all of that sort of like boring stuff. I had to go in and fix it all. So that's been something that people who are, like in the know, they've been kind of down on. That's definitely a downside. And then we still have, we have the baggage of past party leadership and administrations, people who said stupid things about the age of consent that are definitely, they don't represent current leadership. They don't represent, I don't think, the current membership. But we still have to deal with, like past headlines and like the stupid guy who took off his shirt in 2016 and tried to do a striptease on stage, like that kind of crap. It's a little rough.
I have had that brought up in chats before, people's concerns about that specifically. Like, they were just like flat out like concerns that there's like pedophilia is okay or something.
It's flipped now almost to the point where I wonder if it's too aggressive. Like, calm down. Like we don't need to be going after like an 18-year-old whose girlfriend is like 17 and a half years old. Like, let's chill a little bit. There's something called the wood chipper caucus. They're very much opposed to anybody who would abuse children. So I'm almost at the point where I'm like, let's all take a breath. Not everybody is out to harm children. Let's chill. So that's definitely not a concern anymore. The pedo sympathizer stuff is pretty gone.
Let me go back to RFK Jr. real fast. One question here over on Locals from Wells Mortensen, or I guess it's more of a statement, just throwing it at you though. RFK Jr. is very well aware of the role CIA played in his father's and uncle's demises, and that the deep state ain't loved in RFK's household. What do you think about that?
I mean, he said his daughter works for the CIA. So, and he said something positive about the Iraq war. I think that his family probably has a lot of contempt for the CIA, but they might have a naive position that they think they can, grab control of it and make it something good. Because I don't know why else you'd say something nice about the CIA. Maybe he's just trying to not get Hillary Clinton,
Yeah, well, that's I guess I see that. I mean, I don't know what do I know about the? I mean, I guess I know a little bit about what happened. Yeah, go ahead. A little bit, yeah, but I mean, I don't know if let's just say I was concerned that I'd realistically lost family members to the deep state, like their actual lives, and I don't know. maybe I don't want to come out as hard as everybody else. But then again, it would be like, well, then why would you run for office? I mean, if you're nervous about getting Hillary Clinton, then why would you go run for office
Right.
anyway? I don't know. I wouldn't want to do that. I'd be like, you know what? I'm just going to have my garden, and I'd rather just not.
It's a question. It's a big question mark. I think it's a reasonable thing to be concerned about. I don't imagine that he loves the CIA by any means. I mean, especially the comments that he made about, the Tucker Carlson special, that particular episode that talked about JFK's death. I think he knows what's up, but I do think there's some little bit of naivety that saying something nice about them on your announcement day would make it all go away, or that you can change it and make it better. Like that stuff, that's like cancer. That's got to be cut out. Light it on fire, whatever it is you do, your little ritual, put it in a pentagram with some candles, sage it. Like CIA needs to go.
Okay, let's go to the questions. So there's a bunch for you. Actually, this is kind of apropos to this conversation. So John Michael asking, who will be the Libertarian presidential nominee? I would like to suggest Tulsi Gabbard, and Magpie's like, Tulsi is not a Libertarian. And I'm like, that's an understatement. I think a lot of people like she's kind of she's a similar figure in that regard. There's a lot of stuff that people like about her in the freedom movement, censorship, for instance. She seems to be anti big tech censorship. She's had come out against this TikTok bill, which shouldn't even be called the TikTok bill, because I don't even think it says TikTok in it. It's basically just a surveillance bill. It's insane. Okay, so that's great, but she does seem to also be about gun control. I think she thinks she's pro. She wants more, doesn't she? No,
it's like it's been changing. It's been changing, and now it's at a point where we're not really sure where she stands on it. She's done some videos that were very pro 2A. So I'm like, well, that's great. What's your policy position?
Okay.
Because videos and policy are not always the same.
Right.
My take on Tulsi is very much the same as my take on Robert F. Kennedy Jr. These are people who have the spotlight and they have people's attention, and it would behoove us to be kind to them and try to lead them in the right direction, as opposed to bludgeoning them over the head and saying, you're not libertarian enough, you suck. I don't think that is a good idea, and we have actually changed this in the party to always try to pull in a politician from another party who just quit and say, oh, they're a libertarian now, and run them. So I don't know that you're going to see either of them get the Libertarian Party's nomination. Now, I also do think that they've both been moving in a much more libertarian direction, which I am very happy about, and I want to see that continued movement. Mm-hmm. We don't select our nominee until May of 2024, which I personally also think is too late. And I've been pushing very hard to have our 2026 and 2028 national conventions further up in the year. So you're going to see some change on that, but you won't see it necessarily this election. Mm-hmm. We've got some other people who've announced. We've got a lot of people who have interest. Maj Touré of Black Guns Matter made an announcement on social media that was very ambiguous as to whether or not he was running. Same with Clinton Russell. He's a libertarian podcaster on Liberty Lockdown. You've got Robert Breedlove, who's a really big guy in the crypto community who'd made it kind of a foot in the water announcement. You've got a guy named Mike Termott. You've got Chase Oliver, who is more a progressive libertarian. He was the quote unquote spoiler in the Georgia Senate race. So you've got a bunch of people who've expressed interest, who've announced they're running, but you don't have like a heavy hitter who's come into the race yet. And I don't think we will for at least a few more months.
Mm-hmm. All right, let's go to another question here. On the question of presidential pursuits, actually, no, I had one other question I wanted to ask you about what you brought up regarding they're not libertarian enough. They're not enough of whatever I like for me to support them. I think it's a really interesting question. I don't really have an answer, honestly. Like I'm genuinely interested, not just because I have like something I want to say about it. I'm genuinely interested in this because as somebody who used to be in corporate television and now is in alternative media, I have found that idea, like, just, it's not I'm not running somebody for candidacy, but I bring people on my podcast, and sometimes people are just, great, and other people are just not extreme enough, and
Yep.
I want to hear from this person. No, I hate this person because they're not, I disagree with them on this one thing. And I tell my audience regularly, like, it's very easy for audiences in the alternative media world to end up doing the same thing that the advertisers do in the corporate media world, which is basically like, this is the kind of opinion I only want to hear, and stay in your lane, or else I'm pulling my sponsorship, right? And then you can just end up with very similar issues. It doesn't end up becoming like necessarily a freer place to talk about stuff, because the audience will grab you by the scruff of the neck and say, so, but how do you balance that, I guess, with this concern that you are aligning yourself politically with somebody who, hey, but they could do a lot of damage in these particular areas that we are very concerned about. But then again, okay, I don't know, maybe health freedom right now is under attack, so we should go with somebody who's going to protect that, even if they think the CIA is great. Where's the line, in your opinion, on that?
I think that, oh man, I have so much to say on this. I get really aggravated. It goes both ways, right? So the Libertarian Party in 2016 put up Bill Weld as Gary Johnson's running mate. Terrible choice. He ended up quitting the party. He was a gun grabber, and it just locked a bunch of people in prison when he was in positions of power. Like, he was a former governor in Massachusetts. Terrible, not a good fit. Not moving quickly enough in the direction of libertarianism, still had bad views. Now, what we need to do is really highlight and focus our areas of agreement and alignment, and allow people to have one or two exceptions, and try not to focus on that, and be upfront and honest with them. Like for RFK Jr., it'd be like, we don't agree with your position on climate change. And if you want our votes, you need to either shift your talking points about that, or you need to downplay it. We love the rest of your platform. We want you to go forward with X, Y, and Z, but these things are not libertarian. And if you do talk about them, you need to clarify and say that, you're diverging from the Libertarian Party platform. What I don't like is when we just crucify everyone. And this is my biggest pet peeve, is when we go down a list of policy positions and we're like, nope, nope, not good enough, 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 and it's all very, very close to what you want. And then you're like, actually, screw it, I'll just vote for Donald Trump. Because that's not libertarian, like, at all. And I see this in the party all the time. People, like, on the fringes of the party, people who are like, oh, actually, that person was like 90% in agreement with me, but there was like 5% that was really off base. So I'm just going to go with something I don't agree with at all, because screw it.
Okay. All right, let's go back to the topic of presidential candidates again. I would like to know how the party manages to be taken seriously with the likes of Vermin, Supreme in the running. As for vaccine mandates, why wasn't the affront to personal liberty raised at the start?
Oh, man. Well, Vermin Supreme did not get the nomination, so I'd like to make that clear. And he did bring in a lot of people outside of the party. So you saw a little spike in membership because there were people who were really liked Vermin and were really in on his stuff. That's not my jam, and that's not what the new administration is all about. I would say that was, a little bit of a past embarrassment. And it was also because people were a little bit like kind of fed up with politics in general. Vermin's whole thing was, are you quote unquote in on the joke? On the one hand, like, I get it. Politics is a joke right now. But on the other hand, I think that we have a tremendous opportunity to spread a message about, libertarianism, free markets, medical freedom, economic freedom. And that's really where I'm at. And I hope that we've made that pretty clear over the past year.
Oh, did you talk about let me go back to the question. Why wasn't medical freedom or vaccine mandates? Yeah, why wasn't that raised at the start?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's why I'm the chair of the national party now. So what happened was in 2020, our past administration, which was run by Nick Sarwark and then Joe Bishop Henchman, they didn't agree. And, Joe Bishop Henchman was recently seen in Ukraine talking with Zelensky. So, there are a lot of theories that these guys are both like feds. And it was a huge embarrassment for the party. We absolutely missed what should have been our like pivotal moment. And they said nothing. They said nothing for an entire year. So that's why I ran to take over the party, and why the Mises Caucus really like won at the national elections in 2022. It was an embarrassing disaster. I have to own that. You know, like unfortunately, that's part of the party's history. They had a tweet about staying home and wearing a mask. It's just a disaster.
Okay. Does Angela have any inside baseball thoughts on the slew of unconstitutional COVID bills, i.e. AB 209A, created in Southern California, passed by the legislature and signed by Governor Newsom, that are now being challenged in the courts?
I mean, I don't have inside baseball. Trying to think. I mean, I used to live in California. I moved in September of last year before we had the baby, and all the vaccine stuff was like the primary motivating factor. I will say that I was very active in the medical freedom community years ago. Back in 2015, I worked to try to repeal SB 277, the law that removed religious and philosophical exemptions and made medical exemptions much harder to get. And there are state senators in California who take major kickbacks from pharmaceutical companies, and they are highly incentivized to continue doing so. They make a lot of money from it. Senator Pan was one. I'm not sure if he's still in office, but until those people are gone, like you're not going to see a change. They're going to keep moving in that direction because people make a lot of money off of it. And California politics are so bad right now. Sacramento's so corrupt. It's a deeply, deeply entrenched problem.
Susan was asking what state you live in now. You live in Texas.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. LQM07. What's Angela's perspective on the Mises Caucus? Am I saying that right? Mises Caucus? Okay. And their growth and attempt to drive the conversation in the party. Are they an asset or liability to the party? Just showing some of the people with the caucus. It's endorsed by Dr. Ron Paul. You've got Dave Smith, who's a comedian, technically, right? But is he thinking about running? I can't remember.
It's been talked about. It's been talked about. It's
very
still
popular on
Twitter.
Yeah. Scott Horton, he's been on the show before. Larry, look at him. He's a friend of the show too. He's been on a couple of times. Okay, I didn't even know he was part of that. Can you explain what this caucus is for people who may not be familiar?
So the Mises Caucus it was founded in 2017 by Michael Heiss, sort of as a way to get the party back on track, right? So former leadership that I've talked about, Nick Sarwark, was very anti-Ron Paul, started to be very anti-libertarian, quite honestly, and to move us more in a neoliberal direction, taking away the emphasis on individualism and economic liberty and putting it more on things, like LGBTQ issues, politically correct language, things that just didn't seem relevant to libertarianism, or things that seemed very like progressive Democrat mainstream agenda.
Can I ask you, how were they trying to sell to people that that's a libertarian perspective? Like, give me an example. Like, this is libertarian to have this kind of language because why?
Man, it's so embarrassing. It's like talking about, why you should support the rights of children to go through sex reassignment surgery because that supports individual rights.
Okay.
Take of that what you will.
Okay.
That anything and everything that is libertine, morally questionable, but technically you're right to do so, and sometimes it's questionable as to whether or not it's your right to do so when it comes to children, they would just elevate that. That would be at the top of the messaging. All of the emails, fundraising pitches that went out, it was LGBTQ rights, progressive stuff, sex work. You would never see anything about homeschooling, for example, or wins like on free speech wins that had anything to do with religious freedom. It was just a very obvious slant.
Okay. Like, for instance, so ladies Midwest Adventures, I'm curious about our thoughts on the new laws regarding parental rights that will be affected by Washington State, Minnesota State currently. Like, for instance, in Washington State, I mean, if it ends up passing, getting signed into law, like this shelter bill, basically that your kid can run away if you It basically it aligns not taking your kid in for gender reassignment therapy or right. It equates that with abuse if you're not. And so because abuse is if you run away and you're abused, then it's a protected category where the shelter, the state basically doesn't have to tell your parents where you are. Now they've equated that as abuse. So you basically can just go through this surgery without your parents ever even knowing about it if you run away. There's all these questions about who's going to pay for it. Brandy Cruz is a reporter there, used to be also with Corporate News in Seattle, like I was. She has her own podcast and I've been following it. And she says, like, you're just going to get the bill. Like, you don't know your kid just one day. Oh, I guess my kid had this surgery because I got a bill from the hospital, but you don't even know where they are. And if it gets botched, you're not going to be there to care for them because nobody tells you. I mean, there's a lot of problems with it. So would that have been something that you're saying, like, but they would have said, well, that's libertarian because the kid is getting to decide?
Yeah, okay. Unfortunately. Yeah. That's the sort of stuff I'm talking about.
Okay. Interesting. Okay, I want to go over real fast to kick a couple of things from the live chat. Okay, Michael Malice for press secretary. I would tune in for those press conferences. Yes. 100%. Yes. How will ranked choice voting help or hurt the libertarians?
It's a big debate in the Libertarian Party. People say that it's got to be better than what we're at now. We're more likely to get, voted in. I'm not convinced. I'm one of the skeptics on ranked choice voting. A lot of people say that it would just make everything tremendously better to not have zero-sum game voting. I would like to see it. I mean, but if you just rank Democrat, what does it matter? So that's my honest opinion, which is controversial. Like our secretary, Karen Ann Harlow, disagrees with me in good faith. She has good arguments for it. I think I have good arguments against it.
What is the libertarian climate change position? Unless it was answered already, I got in late. I don't think you said specific. And
we don't have let's break it down, right? Because I mean, like, I believe in stewardship of the earth, and to that extent, I'm in favor of certain environmental measures that are voluntary, like please, like clean up trash, don't dump garbage into the river, that sort of stuff. And I think that a lot of that can be asserted through property rights. As far as climate change, libertarians and the Libertarian Party are not in favor of broad sweeping climate change policies. Nothing that's coming out of the World Economic Forum about climate change is going to be anything that we support. I am not convinced that the earth is going to turn into a scorched, smoking husk in 11 years. We've been told that, my entire adult life. I've been hearing that for over 30 years. I'm just not, sorry. I'm not persuaded, and most libertarians are not.
Okay. Say it was. Say you were convinced that the earth was going to turn into a scorched, what do you call it? Corn husk?
Smoking husk.
Smoking husk. Okay. Would a libertarian then say, okay, now we need government intervention? I mean, where is the line on that one?
I think you need to enforce property rights. And most of that environmental damage is not coming from our country. It's coming from other countries. And what do we want to go to war over it? Like, that's a pretty complex question. Probably diplomacy would be a good approach.
I want to ask you about this because let me see if I can make it big. All right. I would have told you were nuts if you told me about this back when I was an environmental reporter. This is Ginger Z, who's probably the most famous meteorologist, corporate TV meteorologist in the country. She works for Good Morning America. And she just like #weather modification. When I went to college for meteorology, cloud seeding was inefficient and expensive. This is not the case today. 42 cloud seeding projects in 10 states with hundreds of ground-based cloud seeders sending silver iodide into storms to make them snow more than they naturally would. Now, the advocates would say, like, well, yeah, I mean, we have to have more snow because we don't have enough snowpack and climate change and all these things. So we're just doing it to help. I look at this and I'm like, look, you know what? I'm like you when it comes to, I'm actually, like, from a personal choice perspective, I'm all about protecting natural resources. That hasn't changed. I'm probably, frankly, compared to like my former coworkers who would be like the mouthpieces for just the I guess, establishment perspective on government control and climate change. I do way more, frankly, for the environment and local resources when it comes to like where I buy my food and what I dump down the drain, what soaps I'm using, all this other stuff. Right. So it's interesting, but I think this scares me. This kind of stuff scares me, but they brag about it now. Like,
Yeah,
you know what I mean? They just
it
brag
seems
about
like
it.
a
It's so
bad
weird.
idea. It seems like a bad idea to dump nanoparticles into the sky that are metallic in nature. Like, can we not? I'm not persuaded that that is a good solution. Also, it's very insulting to anybody who complained about chemtrails 20 years ago, 10 years ago, even 5 years ago. And now they're just out in the open about cloud seeding, and they're using metallic particles in the sky. And they're, do we get, hello? What else?
Yeah,
What else would we call that?
I think I read that cloud seeding, I think, goes back to the 70s. I
Yes,
think.
it does. It totally does. And I think
So,
that it's absurd that we're just now admitting that it's a thing, and we're pretending that everybody who was concerned about what they saw previously was a crazy conspiracy theorist. Like, it's okay to be concerned about some of the things that you see happening right in front of your eyes. I'm concerned about that.
yeah, I'm fascinated by that. Fascinated. Okay, I mean, in like a very dark way. Okay, Stoop Dog asks, the libertarians in my area, upstate New York, were against vaccine mandates, but were completely fine with businesses requiring employees to get them. Can you explain this?
Say it again.
The libertarians in my area, upstate New York, were
Oh,
against government vaccine mandates, but completely fine with businesses requiring
yes.
employees to get them. Can you explain this?
Yes, absolutely. Very poorly articulated philosophy on their part. These mandates that were pushed by private businesses were really propped up by government propaganda. And I think that the libertarians who took this terrible private business can do whatever it wants position failed to really see the nuance of the situation, which is the only reason that people were pushing those mandates is because they believed government propaganda. And those mandates were upheld by government edicts and encouraged by them. And we saw that come to fruition in New York City eventually in a really terrible way. And right now, there's a real reckoning going on in New York City, and a lot of people are getting their jobs back or they're getting lawsuits and settlements. So, yeah, I'm really sorry and mortified by the positions that those people took. I think it was really wrong from a moral perspective and a libertarian perspective.
All right, let's go over back to locals and take a couple more questions here. Kenny Eagle, I know the libertarian platform is to get away from government regulation of personal and health issues, but there is a solid chunk of Christians like myself who find abortion unconscionable. Does the Libertarian Party as a whole have a stomach to restrict second and third term abortions?
So previously, before May of 2022, the last national convention, we had a platform that said the government should just, a platform position on abortion that said the government should stay out of it. We removed that plank. Because we think that abortion is a really divisive topic. I have a 4-month-old baby who is crying right now. Actually, I can hear him. I'm very pro-life. There are other people in the party who are pro-choice, and we have been fighting over it for literally 40 years. We took it out. That way, members can be in the party and they can be staunchly pro-life. They can think that it does necessitate government intervention. They can have whatever opinion on it, and that's allowed. We can have people in other parts of the country who disagree, who are pro-choice, and that's allowed too.
That's interesting. You know, I don't know if this really has anything to do with what we're talking about, specifically libertarianism, but one of the pro-life, is it Lila Rose? Is that her name? She's very famous. Advocates that I was listening to once was talking about like this whole idea, like her opinion on it is the folks who are like, who are like, hey, yeah, you can have an abortion at 39 weeks, or hey, even if it comes out just like it's not viable, well, let it die. That's a more consistent perspective than the person who's like cuts it at 11 weeks, because like what's the difference between 10 weeks and 11 weeks and 12 weeks or 1 week and 2? It has the same potential for life. So, you know, I have definitely changed I used to say years ago, I was like, well, I don't like it. I'm pro-life personally, but I don't know if the government should be saying anything. Then I'm like, well, if murder is illegal, and I follow this perspective that the baby has the potential even at 1 day, then that has to be, that's just the way I look at it. And so I think it's interesting, like, where do you fall on the whole, like, why if you're a libertarian, you're like, okay, but at 8 weeks, I don't know. It's just, it's, I can see how people get confused and wonder about the whole abortion topic related to libertarianism. But I guess it really comes down to, do you see, and this is where I think the pro-life and the pro-abortion people never really come to terms with like their definitions of talking points, because if you define, it's like, they'll say like, well, what about my body, my choice? It's like, yeah, but you don't understand. We're talking about the body and the choice of the child. Okay, well, you don't define it as a child. So how can you even have this? Or it's a very, I don't know. It's just not a debate that's ever done very well, because they define individual right very differently. Like one person's looking at the individual rights of the child and not saying that's part of the mom. The genetics are totally different. The other one saying, no, it is part of the mom because it couldn't be viable outside of me. And I don't know. I mean, it just, I can see how that gets very, that would be where libertarians, I could see how that would kind of be a breakdown. I mean, like you said, you and I seem like we have similar perspectives on it, but I can see how that would be something in the party.
Like, I think, you know, and I don't agree with the argument, and I feel that I can rip it apart pretty easily. But people who are pro-choice in the party say that it's a property rights issue, and that you know, it's your body, your choice. You decide what happens in your body, and they view unborn babies as trespassers sometimes. Now, I say that person didn't trespass. You invited them in, because it takes two to tango, and like that was literally like you grew that body in you. Other people are like, well, I didn't intend to, X, Y, and Z. I think that this is really, and it's fascinating because there are people who are atheists who are pro-choice, but I really think this is more of like a spiritual argument, because if a baby's a clump of cells, why is a human being not a clump of cells?
Yeah.
Or a human being, like,
well, yeah, like Special K on acid, not viable on its own after birth either. I mean, yeah, I mean, where is a baby like viable? Like, you know, because
I mean, if there are circumstances where you and I are not going to be viable,
right? Yeah, like what? Yeah, it brings into question, like, okay, what about my friend's husband who's 85 and has dementia? Like, he's not viable without somebody taking care of him. So, like, is his life, you know, not protected?
If someone locks you in an oil drum, you know, for 20 days, you're not viable. We just,
right.
You know, like, I think not very good.
I know you got a baby that's crying, so I want to do hot seat real fast, answer the rest of the questions. Okay, since many Republican libertarian issues seem to align, is there any concern within the party that a libertarian presidential candidate would pull votes away from the Republican nominee, thus assuring another fascist Democrat in control of the executive branch?
There are people who are never going to vote Republican, and people should keep that in mind. There are people who are just never going to vote Republican. We also pull a lot of votes, quote unquote, from Democrats. I mean, ultimately, it's like no one is entitled to your vote. Like, no party is entitled to it. Libertarian, Republican, Democrat. Like, no one owns your vote. So the spoiler argument, I think, is a little bit of a misnomer. I would also encourage Republicans to do better. Do not do like Donald Trump did and put a bunch of deep state operatives in your cabinet and close to you. Like, that was a terrible decision. And one of the things that really lost him support: stick to your campaign promises. Don't start drone bombing Syria and trying to, you know, assassinate world leaders in Iran. Like, that's not a good thing to do. If you want to get libertarian votes, you got to be more libertarian.
Okay. We already answered. We did abortions. I'm going to skip past Frosty's question. Has being the chair been easier or harder than you expected? Bob Whittlefish wants to know.
It's challenging. There have been more legal issues. State affiliates, state level parties who are really mad that I got elected, who, you know, have essentially done temper tantrums. Like, it's a lot of work. I knew it would be. I did not anticipate the level of hatred that some of my own members would continue to harbor towards me. It's fascinating. It's been a fascinating look into the human psyche,
which is dark. Okay. This is another one's kind of about intervention. Where would you? Okay, Federal Reserve, subsidies, corner soy, affirmative action, civil wrong. It sounds like, okay, welfare outlawed, those aligning with mine, but abortion, property apply to unborn child. I think you mentioned, okay, so you took that out. Example number 2, what is the Libertarian Party stance on public health issues like substance use? Should federal, state, or local government or any level be given the authority to make certain drugs legal and others illegal? What is the stance of the Libertarian Party on government spending our tax dollars to recommend what we should eat or recommend yoga or Tai Chi? And then also domestic security. When, if ever, should our country be involved in foreign wars? Should Julian Assange be sent for? Can you just rapid fire, Angela?
Oh, that's a lot. Free Julian Assange, 100%. I'm friends with some of his family members. 100% support him. I don't think the government should be involved in our food at all. I would like to see private agencies give out ratings on, what's organic, what's been tested, what's safe, what's clean. FDA is not doing a good job anyway. What you're worried that people are going to get hurt, they're already getting hurt. We had Viax, we had, the last 3 years of things that we won't say for YouTube. What was the other one? The other one was about what? Well,
public health. I actually did that. Okay, drugs, and then there's also prostitution follow-up.
Prostitution, I think, should be decriminalized. Having said that, I don't recommend anyone go out and engage in that activity. I just don't think that it's a benefit. I think it's a net loss to lock people up if they're doing it out of starvation and as a last resort. Drugs, I think I have two opinions on this. I think drugs should be decriminalized. Again, like prostitution, I don't think anybody should go out and shoot up heroin. I think that the war on drugs has absolutely failed, and we need to take a different approach on that. Barring that, I think it should be a states' rights issue. People in California want to encourage people to shoot up heroin and fentanyl and lay out on the streets. That's their business. Maybe people in Texas and Oklahoma don't want to do that. That would be a better approach than what we have going on now. And it would also give us an opportunity to see what kind of policies actually work.
Mm-hmm. And domestic security, when do you get involved in foreign wars?
I think that you get almost never involved in foreign wars. I think that diplomacy is a much better way to go about things and to start stripping down entangling alliances. Unfortunately, we seem to be in almost every conflict across the country. At a certain point, we have to start recognizing the problem is us.
Okay, final question. My concern is that without the government regulating business, we know where that ends. Robber barons, corporatism controlling our lives, happening anyways, given current regulatory capture. Question, does libertarianism address this issue? That by making sure the government isn't controlling our lives, we end up allowing powerful business to control our lives? Or does libertarianism simply accept the possibility of that outcome?
All of the major monopolies that people point to during the, it's not actually the progressive era, the era that came after the progressive era, the early 1900s, all those monopolies were propped up by government. The oil companies, the rail companies, if you go and you look and you see, like, when were things monopolized, it was when government intervention stepped in and allowed it to be that way. Regulatory frameworks are usually barriers for competition. They keep smaller people out who are going to compete. So I think that the way to eliminate monopolies is to eliminate government handouts and regulatory handouts and stopgaps, things that don't allow people to compete.
Hey, one last really quick thing, because when I had Lydia on, we were talking about like people who talk about civil war and like the ANCAPs who want this secession and like national divorce type thing. What's the Libertarian Party's or your personal opinion on, ST Mitchell wants to know, on national divorce stance? Is that a successful election strategy, or what do you think about that?
I mean, we're in favor of decentralization. And so whatever flavor that comes, as long as it's peaceful and nonviolent. So if it's going to be a straight up like secession, half the states split off, we're in favor of that. As long as it's like a better outcome for everyone. If you see a return to strict federalism, we'd be in favor of that too. If we see certain counties like in Washington and Oregon want to secede from their state and join another state, we'd be in favor of that. The only thing I'm not in favor of is when we talk about it being violent, because it doesn't have to be violent. We support the right of individuals to go wherever they want, peacefully.
Angela, where should people go to find you, follow you, and learn more?
You can find me here actually on Locals. I am on Locals. You can find me on Patreon, and you can find me on Twitter at Angela4LNC Chair.
Okay. Thank you guys for watching. Thanks, Angela, for doing this. Tell your baby we're really sorry. Thank you for letting us borrow you for a little bit.